Today we'll be doing Iowa State. First I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach Matt Campbell enters his ninth season as the head coach of Iowa State and his 13th season as a head coach. He was the head coach at Toledo for 4 years before going to Iowa State, and he got them a 35 and 15 record in 4 years. And his overall record as a head coach is 88 and 63. His record overall at Iowa State is only 53 and 48, which I know is not that much above 500, but you have to remember that before he got to Iowa State, they were a terrible football program. They weren't much better than Kansas was, and he's improved their program. So, in 6 of the 8 seasons that he's been at Iowa State, they've went to a bowl game, and also 6 out of those 8 seasons, they've had a winning record. The only 2 years they didn't go to a bowl game were his first season and then in 2022. In recruiting, Iowa State was not very good this year. They had only the 53rd ranked recruiting class. But some good news is Iowa State ties Virginia Tech for the most returning production in the country at 86%. And they had the exact same record last year as Virginia Tech did, 7 and 6. And Iowa State, the only difference between them and Virginia Tech is Virginia Tech returns all 24 starters, and Iowa State returns 18 of 24 starters. But to me, if you're going to be high on Virginia Tech, which I am, you've also got to be high on Iowa State. So, starting on the offensive side of the roster, they returned their quarterback, who had a pretty good year last year, Rocco Beck. And is he the type of quarterback that is elite? And is going to throw for 4,000 or more yards and have a chance to win the Heisman Trophy? No. But he is a pretty good quarterback and will have a chance to play at the next level. So last year, he had 3,120 passing yards and 23 touchdown passes, completing 62.9% of his passes and having an 8.5 yards per throw average. And at wide receiver, they're in good shape here with the starters. So they return 2 out of 3 wide receivers that were starters last year and are good. They returned Jaden Higgins, who had last year 983 yards on 53 catches, averaging 18.6 yards a catch, and had 6 touchdowns. And they also have Jalen Noel coming back, who led them in catches last year with 66 and had 820 yards and 7 touchdowns in 12 games last year, averaging 12.4 a catch. And they bring in a transfer wide receiver from North Dakota State who was good at the FCS level, Eli Green. He'll probably be the other starting wide receiver this year. He had there last year 877 on 46 catches and 3 touchdowns, averaging a really impressive 19.3 a catch. And at running back, their starting running back for this season, Abu Samaya, is a really good running back. I think he'll be one of the better running backs in the Big 12 this year. So he only had 84 carries last year, and he did play in 12 games, but only started 2 games last year and had 614 yards and 6 touchdowns, averaging 7.3 a carry. And he had 2 games last year of over 100 rushing yards, including a 276 and 3 touchdowns against Kansas State. But a running back to help him out is questionable. And, you need 2 good running backs nowadays. in football to have a strong run game. And Iowa State did struggle to run the football overall last year. So on the offensive line, they're in good shape here. They've got all five starters coming back. This is one of the most experienced offensive lines in college football. So their offensive line did struggle last year at times to open up holes for their running backs to run through, but they were really good at protecting the quarterback. They only allowed 14 sacks all season. Now moving on to the defensive side. So on the defensive line, they've got 2 out of 3 starters coming back, including Tyler Onidi, who was their best player on the defensive line. I don't know if I pronounced that name right or not, but he had last season 42 tackles and 11 total pressures and 2 sacks. And then they bring in a transfer from Louisiana Monroe, Kennard Snyder, who will be the other starter on the defensive line. He had last year 60 tackles and 5.5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles and 10 total pressures and 2 pass breakups. And then at linebacker, they're not great overall here. So they've got 2 out of 3 of their starting linebackers coming back. But actually, their best starting linebacker for this season, I think, will be the one that was not a starter last year, Caleb Bacon, who was a very good player. And he played in every game last year, even though he didn't make any starts, and had 60 tackles and 3 sacks and 11 total pressures and 2 pass breakups and a forced fumble. And then at safety, they're really good. This is probably the biggest strength of Iowa State's team. So they return Biua Frailer, who is their leading tackler from last season with 107 tackles, and also had 5 pass breakups and 3 interceptions and a sack. He's probably the best player on their team. And they've also got Jeremiah Cooper, who had in 11 games last year 45 tackles and 10 pass breakups and 5 interceptions. And one of those was for a touchdown and also had a forced fumble. And they've also got Malik Verdon, who played in 10 games last year and had 47 tackles and 4 pass breakups and 2 interceptions. And then at cornerback, one of the 2 starting corners returns, and he's really good. Miles Purchase, he had last season 56 tackles and 15 pass breakups and a sack, but the other starting corner spot is questionable. So on special teams, their kicker is gone, so that's questionable. But punter looks pretty good. They returned their punter. So now moving on to the predictions, they start the year against North Dakota. This should be a blowout win. That's an FCS team, and then the rivalry game on the road at Iowa. So I said this in the Iowa video that I think Iowa State has a higher ceiling than Iowa does this year. But this game is on the road, which is a very tough place to play at Iowa. And Iowa's defense is going to be so good this year, and I think they'll shut down Iowa State's offense to where they can't score hardly anything, and it'll be enough to win a really close one. Then they play Arkansas State after getting a week off. This should be a blowout win. So then they play on the road at Houston. So I've said how I like to try to find a game on each team's schedule when I do these prediction videos that I think they might uh, lose when they're not supposed to, and then a game that I think they might win when they're not supposed to. And this was going to be that game, but I just didn't see enough talent on Houston's roster for me to pick against Iowa State in this game. I think that it's going to take time for that coach to improve them. He may be the right coach for them, but they don't have the right roster right now. Now, I do think this will be a pretty close game. So then they play Baylor. Baylor's a team that I think is going to struggle again, and I think they'll be looking for a new coach after this season. Their offense may be a little improved, but their defense I still think is going to be really bad. This probably won't be a blowout win, but Iowa State should win by at least 2 scores. So then they play on the road at West Virginia. West Virginia is also very solid everywhere. So West Virginia is going to be a better running team than Iowa State. They've got a deeper running back unit, but Iowa State is going to be a better passing team. They've got a better quarterback and better wide receiver unit than West Virginia does. But West Virginia can match Iowa State at the line of scrimmage. And West Virginia is going to be an offense that is going to want to run the football a lot more than throw it. And Iowa State's an offense that I think is going to want to throw it a little more than run it. And I think that is going to be an advantage for West Virginia in this game. And it's on the road, a tough place to play. So I'm going with West Virginia to get a close win. Then they play Central Florida at home. Both teams are pretty similar, but I think Iowa State is better at the line of scrimmage, and that'll be the difference. And I'm going with Iowa State to get a close win. So then they play Texas Tech after getting a week off at home. Texas Tech will be okay, but Iowa State's, I think, a better team clearly. They're better at the line of scrimmage than Texas Tech, and they've got a better quarterback and a better wide receiver unit, and a much better secondary than Texas Tech does. So this one could be pretty close, but I'm going with Iowa State. So then they play on the road at Kansas, but of course, this isn't really a road game because Kansas isn't playing their home games at their home stadium this year. They're playing them in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. I think that Kansas will be expected to win this game. They've got a good quarterback too coming back, and they've got a good receiver unit, and they've got a better running back unit than Iowa State does. But Kansas's defense, their secondary is going to be good, but their front seven, I think, is going to struggle. And their offensive line, I think, is also not going to be that good either. Iowa State's got a big advantage, I think, over Kansas at the line of scrimmage. And I'm going to pick Iowa State to win this game uh, in a close one. Uh, but Kansas will score quite a few points, I think, in this game, but they're not going to go out there and score 50. Then they play Cincinnati. Cincinnati's offense may be closer to average this year. They may score a little bit in this game, but their defense may give up 40 points a game this year, and I think this will be a blowout win for Iowa State. So then they play on the road at Utah. So Utah's going to be even better, I think, than Iowa State at the line of scrimmage. And they're pretty good at least everywhere on their team. They don't have any uh, cases on their roster where they'll even be average like Iowa State does. So I do think this will be a pretty close game, but I've got to go with Utah to get this one. So then they play to end the season Kansas State at home. So Kansas State actually lost to Iowa State last year at home. So Kansas State is going to be a much better rushing team than Iowa State, but Iowa State's going to be much better of a passing team than Kansas State. I don't think Kansas State's going to be very good of a passing team this year. So Iowa State can also match up well with Kansas State at the line of scrimmage, and Iowa State and Kansas State are pretty similar in my opinion. I think Kansas State's a little bit better, but it's close enough to where Iowa State, is a tough place to play, so I'm going to go with them to get a close win. So my final prediction for Iowa State is 9-3 overall, and 7-2 in the conference. So the games against uh, Iowa, West Virginia, and Utah, I don't see much of a chance of them beating Utah, but there is a chance that they could beat Iowa or West Virginia one and get to 10-2. I think they have a little bit of a chance to go to the conference championship this year. I just think it's unlikely, but it's also possible they could lose two other games and finish what they were last year in the regular season at 7-5. But I think they'll at least get to 8-4 this year with all they have coming back. But that will be it with this video, and please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.